Purdue fans. This is Johnny DeCamp bringing you play-by-play the rousing...
Everybody, along with Ron Kramer, this is Pete Van Wieren welcoming you to Ross-Ade Stadium.
Live from Ross-Ade Stadium in West Lafayette, Indiana.
It's a football Saturday in West Lafayette, Indiana, and one of the biggest home games in decades.
Boilermakers rush the field. What a night in West Lafayette.
Your Central Indiana Ford dealers are a proud sponsor of Purdue football and the Ross-Ade's Greatest Games podcast. Visit your local Central Indiana Ford dealer today.
Welcome back to the Ross-Ade's Greatest Games podcast. I'm Corey Palm. He's Tim Newton, and we are working our way through some of the greatest games in the history of Ross-Ade Stadium as it continues to celebrate 100 years. We've got the actual 100th anniversary coming up here in a few weeks. We're within the month. November 22nd, 1924, the first game in Ross-Ade Stadium. That's not what we're looking at here today, Tim. Today we are going... Yeah, for
I don't
real.
remember the details on that one.
It's a little sketchy, a little fuzzy. Today we're going back to 2003, when Senior Day 2003, when the Boilermakers took on the 10th-ranked Iowa Hawkeyes in what was a very special, pretty dominant victory for the Boilermakers.
Yeah, it really was. And you go back, and I've been around Purdue football now for 40-plus years. The 2003 defense, I think, was the best defense I've seen at Purdue. You go back, and I looked at the starting lineup on defense that day, and I think it's either 8 or 9 guys on that defense played in the NFL.
Wow.
And some of them had long careers in the NFL. A really dominant defense, an offense that had its moments, and certainly this was a day that they played pretty well against a really good Iowa team. Mm-hmm. But this was a dominating game. 27-14 was the final, but the game was really a lot more one-sided than that. It
was. The Boilermakers ran out to a 27-0 advantage before Iowa tacked on a couple late. You talk about that stacked defense. One of the members of that team unit will be joining us later. Niko Koutouvides will be our guest for the second half of the show. He was, a linebacker on a crew of just unbelievable talent.
He was a linebacker with a little bit of an attitude, which you like. You don't want your linebackers to be nice guys on the field, although he's certainly a different guy off the field. He had a great game. He was in double figures in tackles. Sean Phillips was absolutely unblockable in this game. 4 tackles for loss. He had 2 sacks, and he was in Iowa's backfield, I think, more often than their quarterback was.
Yeah, it was a tough day for Nate Chandler for sure. The Hawkeyes couldn't do much of anything. Less than 100 yards on the ground. Just barely 301 in total offense for the day. And like you said, this was an Iowa team that came in ranked number 10, finished the season ranked 8th. They were a very good Hawkeye squad.
They really were. And I think Purdue's offense, again, really clicked that day. But the defense was the story. They shut the Hawkeyes out for the first 2 quarters plus. Iowa got a couple of late touchdowns and racked up some of their yards late. But it was Purdue dominating this game from start to finish.
It was. That team... Part of the reason it was so good was because there were so many seniors on that squad. Seniors that actually began their careers, a lot of them, during the Rose Bowl season 3 years earlier.
And that senior team did not have a great start because if you remember, the 2003 season started with a home loss to Bowling Green.
It did.
With a touchdown late in that game, and you were thinking, hey, this was a really highly hyped team, a really highly hyped defense. They just gave up 27 to Bowling Green, including the game-winning touchdown. Yeah. Where do you go from here? Well, the only other games they lost that year were against Michigan, against Ohio State in overtime, which probably cost Purdue a trip at the Rose Bowl, and then the bowl game loss that year to Georgia in overtime, a game that Purdue led at one point 25-0.
That was don't chase points. Textbook case of don't chase points. As you said, that Bowling Green team, I went back and looked at the Falcons from that season. They were pretty darn good. They finished ranked 23rd in the country. They finished with 11 wins. Mm-hmm. Their only losses were to Ohio State and Ben Roethlisberger and the Miami Redhawks.
Yeah, but still a game that Purdue felt like it should have won at the home stadium. And, it was not a great way to start the senior year for those guys, but they certainly finished on senior day with a flourish.
They did. They reeled off 6 straight after that loss to Bowling Green before that road loss to Michigan. And then, like you said, senior day against the Hawkeyes, a special day for Sean Phillips, Gilbert Gardner, Landon Johnson, Stu Schweigert, and of course, Niko.
And the one play I remember offensively in that game was the touchdown, I think it was early in the third quarter, when Kyle Orton hit Anthony Chambers. Iowa brought a blitz, and Chambers just released. And in all my years in Purdue football, I've never seen a receiver that open. He caught the ball without a defender probably within 5 or 10 yards of him, and it was just a jaunt into the end zone. At that point, the game was over.
Yeah, that just doesn't happen at this level, for sure. Ben Jones hit a couple field goals that day.
Yep.
Gerard Voigt had a couple rushing touchdowns.
And had over 100 yards rushing. I think a lot of people, when they talk about Joe Tiller's era, they remember certainly the passing, which was important. The Boilermakers had some pretty good running teams, and Gerard Voigt had more than 120 yards in that game against the Hawkeyes. You go back even the Rose Bowl clinching year, Montrell Lowe had a super game against Indiana to clinch it in the bucket game. So if you really sold out to try to stop the pass and emptied out the box, Jim Chaney, who was the offensive coordinator, was not afraid to run the football on you.
That's for sure. A defense and a strong running game, exactly what we all don't remember the Tiller years for.
Right.
But for sure, that was the case in 2003 in that win over the Hawkeyes. The Boilermakers went on to a dominant victory over IU the next week in the bucket game, and then, as you said, a trip to the Capital One Bowl.
Yeah.
And it's been fun talking about this. Any final thoughts before we get to Niko?
No, a 9-4 season that didn't start well, didn't end well, but in between, again, when your only losses are to Michigan and Ohio State, and I will say the loss to Ohio State that year was probably the hardest I've ever seen Joe Tiller take a loss. Yeah. Joe was always very effusive after games, whether they won or lost, a little bit like we see with Matt Painter now, where that was the one game he completely shut down in the post game, and I think he was more upset about that loss than any other one he had at Purdue.
Well, like you said, there was a second Rose Bowl on the line there. There was, some real national respect because Purdue kind of flirted with the top 15 ranking that season, but never really spent a lot of time there. That would have vaulted the Boilermakers into the top 10 and to Pasadena again and. It's a very different legacy.
And it's a very rarely that when you think of a game 20 years ago, you think of a punter. Ohio State's punter was the MVP of that game because at least a half dozen times, if not more, he punted Purdue inside the 10-yard line, and the Boilermakers had to drive on a long field all day long, only managed 13 points in an overtime loss, and again, that cost them a trip back to Pasadena.
Yep. Well, bit of a downer note there. Like we said, the Boilermakers won the bucket, went to the Capital One Bowl.
Let's talk about a good performance and Niko Koutouvides coming up.
He'll be right after the break.
Your Central Indiana Ford dealers are a proud sponsor of Purdue football. Visit your local Central Indiana Ford dealer today.
Welcome back to the Ross-Ade's Greatest Games podcast. We're joined now by Niko Koutouvides, two-time first-team All-Big Ten linebacker and a long NFL career after that. We'll talk about all of that, but Niko, first and foremost, thanks for finding some time for us.
Yeah, no problem. As we discussed earlier before we went on, it's been 18 years since I've been back to campus, and it is a pretty exhilarating feeling to be back.
I can imagine.
We got in late last night, but now that the sun is out, I'm curious to put my feet to pavement and walk campus and reminisce a little bit about the experiences I had here at Purdue.
It's changed a bit.
Yeah, it has changed a little bit. I have to ask, how many different ways has your last name been pronounced, and what's the worst? What's the worst pronunciation you've ever heard?
I mean, they've hacked it many, many times in my career, and the easiest way to allow someone to understand how to say it is eat your Wheaties, Koutouvides. So we simplify it that way, and everybody says, you know what? That's pretty damn easy.
Yeah.
But it's been hacked a lot of different ways. And even I have 3 boys, and when they get up to at baseball, when they're announcing their the new batter, they always hack it up. And all the kids start laughing, and then I'm like, just concentrate on hitting the ball.
See the ball hit the ball.
Part of the Greek struggle, right?
Exactly. It's all Greek to me.
Yeah.
What got you here in the first place?
You know what? It's kind of interesting. I went to Milford Academy, which was a prep school at the time in Milford, Connecticut. It was a pretty powerhouse program, putting a lot of 1AA kids to major schools that were struggling with academically. Now, I didn't struggle academically, but I felt that the high school I played on was not viewed as a powerhouse, and I felt if I could get more eyes on myself, I may have an opportunity to get a full scholarship and help my parents, obviously, not have to forfeit that large lump sum to go to school. And obviously Drew Brees was here. Purdue was playing very, very well, and they went to the Alamo Bowl that year against Michael Bishop, and they upset Michael Bishop in Kansas State at the time, and it was a huge win for the program. The East Coast recruiter, Coach Emanuel, came out there and he said, "You know what? I want you to come take a visit to Purdue." And Purdue was my first visit out of, I think, 3 or 4 schools. And when I came to campus, Vinny Sutherland was my host.
I was a visitor.
Exactly. And things
you learned about college really quickly.
Really fast. And, they came off a big win. Obviously, the whole program was behind Drew Brees and his abilities to succeed. The opportunity to win in the Big Ten right away was there. And actually, a lot of the linebackers, Willie Fells, Mike Rose, were seniors and leaving.
Right.
So they were kind of, it was kind of next man up. And the opportunity to play, I thought, would be there. And going to a prep school that, even those 3 months, allowed me to play at a higher level. So I thought, okay, I can probably go in and compete right away and not redshirt. So when I took my visit with Vinny, I said, "Oh, this place is great." I at that time, loyalty was actually a word people stood behind, and I told Coach Tiller and the crew that I commit to Purdue, and I'm going to cancel the rest of my visits, and kind of the rest was history from there.
When you talk about Coach Tiller, what do you think of? What do you remember the most about him?
Yeah, Coach, I mean, what a pioneer, right? What he did, the vision he had, and the blue-collar players that he found, right, was, and those players, they came, again, the loyalty factor, right? He found kids that wanted to compete, kids that wanted to fight, kids that wanted to thrive with each other, win together. And when he found those characteristics in those players, and when you put that together with his spread offense, I mean, sky was the limit at that time. And we all came believing in that. And, at the time, offensively, we were very dominant. Mm-hmm. And then, the recruiting class that I came in at, I think we had, 8 guys get drafted in the NFL on that defense. We were very dominant on defense, and offense was slightly struggling, right? Kyle Orton was just kind of finding his way. Yeah. And it was like, if we can just get this thing to gel together all at the same time, we might have a chance to go win a championship. And we competed. We played in big bowl games. We created bonds that last a lifetime. But Coach Tiller is a testament to that. And, he really changed his program tremendously. Yeah.
One thing I've always thought was amazing about that first year you were here, the Rose Bowl team,
yes,
was how many of you freshmen played.
I know.
How many, how big of an impact you guys had coming in. That was a great team, amazing offensive line, of course. Drew pulling all the right switches back there, but you also had fantastic depth and senior through freshman, a lot of guys contributing.
Absolutely. The O-line was fantastic. I think that whole O-line got drafted in the NFL. And
all of them played in the NFL, and all of them played in the Super Bowl.
Yeah. So, Matt Light, I think his first 4 years, he had 3 Super Bowls with the Patriots. It was it's kind of like Karl Loftus is, 3 years in, and he's already got 2. So some of those guys, I went to 2 and lost 2, so some of those guys just hit it at the right time. But again, finding those character guys willing to play, grab their lunch pail every day, come to work, believe in each other, was really the recipe that made us successful.
We're talking about the 2003 Iowa game, which was your senior game, but after that game, you had a heartbreaking loss against Ohio State. When you think back and what could have been, how many times do you relive that game and think about maybe going to the Rose Bowl that year? Yeah,
there's a couple of games that I relive all the time. Unfortunately, it doesn't bring a lot of excitement to myself. The Super Bowls, the 2 Super Bowls I lost, the games against Ohio State specifically, that wind was blowing, that 4th down play, I can still remember it to this day, how they converted that. There's a lot of things we probably could have done different, but everything happens for a reason, and it's a testament on how you react to those situations. And that adds armor to your shield and how you are and evolve as a person. And the experience we never want to give up no matter what. We would never change it. And I know now things have changed tremendously on the college level. I can't even really keep up. But those times were a lot of fun.
You could have had an NIL deal with every Greek restaurant in West Lafayette. I mean, just think of where you could have been these days.
First, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. What's life been like since football? You had an NFL career, and then since then, where's Niko been?
Yeah, so you know what? During the collective bargaining disagreement in 2010 with the NFL, we had a work stoppage, and I was going into my 8th year in the NFL. And again, nobody plays forever in football. So I felt at that time it was a good opportunity for me to go and try to figure out what I'm going to do after football. When you retire from football, you just retire from football, not life.
Right.
Unless you're making, the top echelon of the money, which most guys aren't. So I went and did some internship, job shadowing with a developer in like Westchester County, and we got some exposures going downtown, looking at tax liens, subdivisions, regulations. My brother at the time was working for a large institutional developer in Manhattan. And, I started getting some exposure in real estate, and I said, interesting. If you can, acquire good real estate strategic locations, it can be very prosperous. So I did that on and off for the last couple years I was playing in the NFL. And my brother and I said, you want to know what? You're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing. Why don't we try to pick off a small little deal, a boutique deal, see if we can build some rental housing and generate some income. So fast forward 2013, I found this nice piece of property in a really revitalized town center in Connecticut. We acquired it, we put the design team together, and we started to go for an approval. That same training camp was over. Coach Belichick called me in the office. He says, Niko, I love you, but we're going to let you go. And I said, you know what, Coach? I have no problem with that. It's probably that time. I had neck injury, back injuries. And I was really enjoying kind of the real estate thing. And I said, thank you for the opportunity. And that next day, I was working for what is now our companies. We got the approval. We built a little 18-unit apartment building in the center. It did fantastic. Then we built 101 units. Then we built 160 units with a superstructure garage. Now we're under construction on 205 units. We purchased some offices and industrial buildings. So things have been very, very
business is good.
Very, very good. I've been very, very fortunate. And the rental market, as you know, not only in Connecticut, all over the country, you see these mid-rise buildings, whether it's 4 stories over, one podium with retail on the bottom, they're happening everywhere, and that's what we're building. Yeah. That's what we specialize in, ground-up construction on new developments. So
you'll see they're happening here in
West Lafayette.
Yes, I know. I could see them
campus has
last
changed
night,
a little bit.
I want to go see them in the sun today.
I'll bet.
Hey, you have a tie to a current player on this roster. Talk about how you helped get Ryan Brown to Purdue.
Yeah, so I didn't. Again, Coach Chaplick from Milford Academy calls me and said, I have a stud, absolutely stud quarterback here. You got to meet him. I think Purdue should take a look at him. He's, obviously the quarterbacks, the carousel quarterbacks here at Purdue speak for themselves. Mm-hmm. And Coach Chaplick thought, he would fit right in here in this program. He had a combine in Connecticut, so I went to it. I met the kid. I watched him perform. Tall, strong arm, very humble, good kid, leader. And I said, you know what? This kid's got a lot of talent. He's from Ohio originally. I reached out. Again, there's been a couple regimes changed here at Purdue, so I don't really have many contacts like I used to. But I made a couple text messages, and I said, hey, who's the East Coast recruiter? You got to take a look at this kid. Brom was aware of him at the time. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Brom left in that transition, and I didn't know what the kid was going to do, if he was going to go to Louisville or want to still stay committed to Purdue. So we had a couple more conversations, and I said, look, have at it. If that's the school you're most comfortable with, even if that coach left, another coach is going to come in, but your talent will eventually speak for itself. And he says, no, I'm going to stay with my commitment to Purdue. he got the first opportunity last week, and wow, it was fun to watch.
Yes, it was.
It was really fun to watch.
Yeah, sure was. The job of being a Boilermaker football player never ends, does it?
It doesn't. And look, that's what it's all about, right? Networking. You know, people. You give. If someone's talented, I always say that. If you can play, they will find you some way or somehow. And you know, getting a kid an opportunity and him finally having that opportunity and continue to hopefully excel is going to be super important for him. But from what I'm hearing, I hear he's got great leadership qualities. The teammates really enjoy him. So hopefully that can continue on. You know, I know it's been a struggle here early on, but last week, I mean, it was fun to watch.
Yeah. Just back to 2003 for a second.
Yes.
When you look at that defense and look at your part on it, and you look back at your Purdue career, what do you want people to remember about Niko Koutouvides as a player here at Purdue?
One, you know, if you guys remember, I always talked a lot of crap.
I do remember that.
I would not shut up. So if I can go back and change one thing, I'd probably talk less crap and just play more. Because I tell my kids all the time, just play. Don't worry about the talking crap. So unfortunately, as you age, you become wiser. If I had that genie, I would rub it and wish to become wiser without aging, but that's not going to happen. But no, that I played relentless, that was one thing. Playing relentless, when you have a player that has no care for his body and will give everything he has to sacrifice to compete and win, is super important. I always try to do that on a daily basis. The leadership qualities, you know, in any army you have to have generals, right? And in order to be a general, you have to earn respect from your peers. And that was a goal of mine, and that's what I was able to create here along with other teammates, which was super, super important. And then lastly, I wanted to make sure that we won together as a team, because it always, no matter what, the team is more important than any individual. And I've learned that not only here at Purdue, but when you get to the next level, especially when I was with New England with the Patriots, that it's always, and will be always about that team. And Coach Belichick really drove that into us because, again, we weren't the most talented team. We didn't have the most talented players, but we played together. And when you play together, great things can happen.
You've mentioned Coach Belichick a couple times, obviously, for good reason.
Yeah.
I've always thought it was fascinating how there was sort of a Purdue pipeline to New England. Was there something about values and the way things were done here that translated so well?
1,000%. 1,000%. Coach Belichick is very strategic on how he recruits, okay? And certain schools are very appealing to him because of the structure, the team atmosphere, right? I mean, we just had the Tom Brady Hall of Fame event in Foxborough. I couldn't believe how many Purdue guys were there. I could not believe that. But there's certain schools he'll go and grab from. Rutgers, too, is a big school he grabs from a lot. Schiano runs, a very tight ship over there. And again, Coach Testament, I don't know if you remember kid Jamie Collins, a linebacker from Southern Mississippi. There was one coach at his combine at Southern Miss, and that was Coach Belichick. And that kid is the closest thing to Lawrence Taylor that we've ever seen from an ability standpoint. It's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Recruiting is super important, and when you can find those players like Coach Tiller and his staff used to do, I mean, now it's got to be even more important to do that because now you're fighting with the cash flow, all right? So you really got to go down deep and try to find guys that you think are really going to be, a piece of the puzzle for that team atmosphere. And it's tough. It's a lot of time and effort.
Yeah.
Well,
they put together a special group of you guys. That senior day win over Iowa is the game that we focused on here today. We didn't talk much about it. Tim and I the way this show works, we give a little recap and then we talk to our guest. And that game was a great win. Offense jumped out to an early lead. And then you guys just shut down a top 10 team.
Yeah.
We'll get you out of here on this one. A top 10 win on senior day, 9 wins as in your final campaign at Purdue. Cap it off with a trip to
Capital One Bowl.
Capital
right?
One Bowl. Yep. Could you have imagined anything better?
You know, now that I look back at it, probably not, other than competing for a national championship. But to have my family, my parents, again, both immigrants, they didn't have a clue about American football, right? The journey that I traveled to get here, all the way in West Lafayette, Indiana, have me walk with them on the field, to win that game for our teammates and have a chance to go and compete on a good bowl game was, definitely a great experience. And, those memories we'll never forget. And, just seeing the guys' faces and those hugs at the end of the game mean a lot. Yeah. Very important. So, the locker room is a big part of our game, right? How much time do we spend in that locker room together with all walks of life? It's just amazing where you can take, I call us creatures because we're creatures of habit, but all these people from different parts of even the world now they come from, right? And place them in one small little sanctuary. And the things that we discuss in there are sacred to ourselves. The laughs we have in there, the cries, the fights, whatever it may be. But that is really what is super important to me, those bonds.
Love it.
Niko Koutouvides, a guy who clearly ate his Wheaties. Thanks for being here, and thanks again